Welcome to the debate. What if I told you that the most psychologically damaged child in a toxic family isn't the one being screamed at, but the one being given a trophy?
Yeah, it's a chilling thought. Because today, we are investigating how narcissistic parents actually pass their trauma down to their children. We're specifically looking at the rigid, structurally abusive roles assigned within these closed family systems.
Right, and we are zeroing in on the two most common and honestly the most polarized roles assigned by a parent with severe narcissistic traits. That's the scapegoat and the golden child.
And I'll say this right up front. If you're listening to this and, recognizing your own family dynamic, or maybe wondering why certain adults in your life behave the way they do, this investigation might sound incredibly familiar to you.
It really might. So the central question we are debating today is this. Within a narcissistic family system, does the scapegoat or the golden child endure the more profound, enduring psychological injury?
It's a heavy question.
It is. And I take the position that the scapegoat suffers the most severe trauma. This is due to the relentless, over-emotional abuse they endure, which, and we'll get into this, literally alters their neurobiology and leaves them with complex PTSD.
And I'll be arguing that while the scapegoat's injury is incredibly visible, the golden child actually sustains a deeper, more insidious psychological wound. Their abuse is completely disguised as love and privilege.
Disguised as love, right?
Exactly. Which results in the total erasure of their authentic identity.
Okay, let's lay out our respective positions so we can see the full board here. I'll begin with the scapegoat. A narcissistic parent is, at their core, fundamentally operating from a place of hidden shame and a highly fragile ego. To manage that, they use a psychological defense mechanism called splitting. They take everything they subconsciously hate about themselves, split it off, and basically project it onto one child. That child becomes the scapegoat.
The designated receptacle.
Exactly. The designated receptacle for the parent's rage, blame, inadequacy. They are essentially punished just for existing. But I want to move past the clinical jargon here and look at what this actually does to a developing human.
Right, the somatic reality.
Yes. When we look at the neurobiological evidence, we see that chronic emotional abuse places this child in a constant, unyielding state of hypervigilance. The brain's threat detector, the amygdala, actually becomes enlarged and hyperreactive.
Wow.
Yeah, and at the same time, the hippocampus, which helps regulate emotions and process memories, becomes underdeveloped. So you aren't just giving a child a tough childhood. You are structurally wiring their brain to believe they are in constant mortal danger.
Which is a profound injury, I agree.
It culminates in a deep, internalized sense of toxic shame that the scapegoat carries into literally every interaction of their adult life.
I hear that. And the neurobiological impact of being the family target is undeniable. But I want to challenge you to look at the fundamental nature of covert manipulation.
Okay, let's hear it.
The golden child's injury is structurally more damaging because it entirely bypasses the child's natural defenses. You see, the scapegoat is attacked, yes, but the golden child is consumed.
Consumed?
Yes. What the narcissistic parent does to the golden child is a form of profound emotional enmeshment. The parent projects their grandiose false self onto this child. So on the surface, this looks like the child is adored. They're put on a pedestal.
Right, the trophy child.
Exactly. But the hidden meaning here is that this child is not allowed to exist as a separate human being.
Hold on, let me make sure I'm wrapping my head around this. Are you saying the love they receive isn't actually love?
Precisely. It's highly conditional. It's basically rented through constant flawless performance. Let's use a real-world example, because most people completely miss this dynamic.
Sure.
Imagine a mother and her son at a soccer game. The son loves playing defense because he likes the strategy of it, but the mother needs him to be the star striker who scores all the goals.
Because it makes her look good.
Right. His goals make her look like a superior parent to the other mothers on the sidelines. If he plays defense, she withdraws her affection. She becomes cold or, subtly shames him on the car ride home.
And if he plays striker?
If he scores as a striker, she showers him with praise. The psychological mechanism at play here is identity erasure. The golden child's authentic self, the kid who just loves playing defense, is completely sacrificed to mirror the parent's needs.
Leaving them with what, exactly?
They grow up with a highly fragile self-concept and a nervous system wired to believe that any assertion of their true individuality will result in total abandonment.
Okay, I see the tragedy in that erasure. But let me push back on that specific point. I want to bring us back to the sheer visceral reality of what the scapegoat endures on a daily basis.
Go ahead.
We just cannot understate the devastation of the overt attack. Trauma experts talk about the core wound of the scapegoat as the creation of a massive inner critic.
Right. The internalized abuser.
Exactly. Because the parent constantly tells the child they are defective, lazy, or just inherently bad. The child internalizes this voice simply to survive. They begin to believe that their normal needs and boundaries are dangerous imperfections. We're talking about children who are pushed past the standard fight or flight response into what polyvagal theory calls dorsal vagal shutdown.
The freeze response.
Yes, but it's more than just freezing. It's a biological collapse. Imagine an animal playing dead to survive a predator. That is what the scapegoat's nervous system is doing constantly.
It's exhausting just thinking about it.
They experience emotional numbness, dissociation, and a pervasive feeling of being fundamentally broken. So, I have to ask you directly, how can the psychological burden of having to be a star striker compare to the visceral neurological damage of being the family punching bag, of existing in a perpetual state of terror?
I come at it from a different way because we have to look at what is actually happening to the core self. You're describing a horrific assault on the self, but the scapegoat at the very least actually has a self to be assaulted.
Wait, you're saying the golden child doesn't?
The scapegoat is attacked for who they are. The golden child is never allowed to build that foundation in the first place. I want to break down the behavioral forensics of this manipulation cycle.
Okay, unpack that for us.
It operates like a very dark algorithm. Trigger: the parent feels inadequate. Manipulation: the parent demands the golden child perform perfectly to soothe the parent's ego.
Right.
Then comes victim confusion. The child feels a deep, nameless emptiness, but is constantly told by the family and society that they are the lucky one.
Oh, that's incredibly gaslighting.
It is, which leads to guilt. The child feels ungrateful for feeling empty. Compliance: the child works harder to be perfect, to earn the love they feel they are failing to appreciate. And finally, control restoration. The parent feels superior again.
That is just a vicious cycle.
It is. It's like writing code for a computer program where every time you try to save your own personal file, the system automatically deletes it to make room for the parent's operating system.
Wow.
The trauma of the golden child is a trauma of profound emptiness. When you are the scapegoat, you know you are being hurt. When you are the golden child, the manipulation is disguised as a reward. You don't even know you've been compromised.
Which makes it hard to realize you need help. I hear that. But doesn't that ignore the fact that the scapegoat's awareness of their abuse often leads to a crushing sense of isolation?
How so?
Well, being aware of the wound doesn't necessarily make it easier to heal. The scapegoat isn't just abused by the narcissistic parent. They are systematically betrayed by the entire family unit.
Ah, the flying monkeys.
Yes, the parent employs flying monkeys, which is a term for other family members who are manipulated into siding with the abuser to gang up on the scapegoat. If the scapegoat speaks up, the siblings and the enabler parent all turn on them.
The parent gets total control of the narrative.
Exactly. The psychological reward for the narcissist is total control. But the impact on the scapegoat, it's a complete destruction of trust in humanity. They learn that the world is a fundamentally dangerous place and that they are fundamentally unworthy of protection.
That systemic betrayal is devastating, I agree. But notice what happens next. That total destruction of trust is actually what initiates the child's capacity for reality testing.
Reality testing.
Yes, and that changes the entire trajectory of their eventual emancipation from this toxic system.
Let's follow that thread, because the scapegoat's trust being shattered so early, it fundamentally breaks how they attach to people later in life. We see this in attachment theory all the time.
Right, both roles lead to insecure attachment styles.
Absolutely. But the scapegoat is chronically vulnerable to being re-victimized because their baseline for love was established through intermittent reinforcement.
Can you unpack the mechanism of that trauma bond for the listener? Because I think people often mistake it for weakness rather than a biological response.
Absolutely. It's essentially an addiction cycle driven by hormones. The abuse spikes cortisol, the stress hormone. Then, when the abuser temporarily backs off or shows a tiny crumb of affection, the brain releases dopamine, the reward hormone.
So they get hooked on the cycle.
The scapegoat's nervous system begins to equate chaos with connection. So, in adulthood, they subconsciously seek out partners who replicate the narcissistic parent's abuse because it feels familiar to their nervous system.
A healthy relationship feels boring to them.
Or even anxiety-inducing. They are searching for a rescuer but often find another predator, repeating the cycle of emotional neglect. Their emancipation from the family is often stalled because they just end up in another abusive dynamic.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that the scapegoat is structurally worse off in the long run here. Let me tell you why.
Go for it.
What you're describing is a brutally difficult path. Absolutely. But the scapegoat possesses a distinct evolutionary advantage. The fire alarm is ringing.
Meaning the abuse is obvious to them?
Right, because the scapegoat is the target of the abuse. And because the injustice is so overt, they eventually recognize that the building is on fire. Their pain serves as an alarm bell.
Okay, I see where you're going.
This allows them to differentiate from the family. They are the ones who usually leave, go no contact, and seek out therapy. They have the psychological distance required to say, this is wrong, and I am a separate person.
And the golden child doesn't hear the alarm?
The golden child doesn't even have a fire alarm installed. They lack this reality testing because they are consistently rewarded for their compliance. Their enmeshment can last a lifetime.
Because it looks like success.
Exactly. They are entirely blind to their own abuse. How do you emancipate yourself from a prison when you've been convinced you're sitting on a throne? They think the suffocating expectations are just what love is.
I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning because you're assuming the scapegoat escapes cleanly once they realize the building is on fire. Knowing your parent is a narcissist doesn't magically shrink your enlarged amygdala.
Fair point.
Reality testing does not immediately heal a dysregulated nervous system. Even after they physically leave, the scapegoat is plagued by the conditioning. If they do emancipate, the guilt and shame they carry are monumental. And let's not forget the smear campaign.
Right, the parent's retaliation.
Exactly. When the scapegoat leaves, the narcissistic parent goes into overdrive to protect their public image. They will spread vicious rumors to extended family and friends, painting the scapegoat as crazy, unstable, or cruel for abandoning the family.
It's a scorched earth tactic.
It is. The scapegoat has to build an entirely new reality from absolute scratch, carrying the heavy burden of being entirely discarded by everyone they grew up with.
But the golden child doesn't even get the chance to build a new reality. They remain tethered to the narcissist's reality, serving as a lifelong source of narcissistic supply. And let's look at the darkest implication of this.
The transgenerational transmission itself.
Yes, because the golden child is rewarded for reflecting the narcissistic parent's grandiosity, they are highly vulnerable to internalizing those exact defense mechanisms. They are at a significantly higher risk of developing narcissistic traits themselves.
That is a terrifying thought.
They learn that relationships are purely transactional, that image is everything, and that vulnerability is a weakness to be exploited. The scapegoat absorbs the pain, but the golden child often absorbs the pathology.
So they become the very thing that harmed them.
I would argue that losing your capacity for authentic human empathy because you were trained to be an extension of a narcissist is a far more profound psychological injury.
That is a chilling point. But we must look at how this actually manifests in the daily lived experience of these individuals as adults. Let's look at the scapegoat in the workplace or in a social setting.
Okay.
They battle chronic, debilitating self-doubt and social anxiety. Research shows that adult children of narcissists who were scapegoated possess a hypervigilance that makes them scan every room for threats. They can read microexpressions and shifts in tone before someone even says hello.
They become behavioral profilers just to survive.
Exactly. And while some might call this a superpower for detecting toxic people, the reality is that it is utterly exhausting. They live in a state of self-sabotage. They feel profound fear and guilt about succeeding or being in the spotlight.
because shining brightly used to be dangerous.
Because in childhood, shining brightly brought immediate retaliation from the envious parent. So they shrink themselves to stay safe. And we have to talk about the somatic reality, how this trauma lives in the body.
The body keeps the score.
Always. Scapegoats often suffer from mysterious physical ailments, chronic fatigue, and autoimmune issues as adults. This is the physiological toll of carrying the family's projected toxic shame for decades.
And at first glance, the golden child seems to have the exact opposite experience in adulthood. They often appear incredibly successful. They might be the CEO, the star athlete, the seemingly perfect spouse.
But it's a facade.
Yes. Here is what most victims, and honestly, even therapists, never realize about the adult golden child. Their entire existence is built on a foundation of sand. They live with the terrifying subconscious knowledge that their worth is entirely tied to their performance.
So they can't ever slip up?
If they fail, if they stumble, or if they even attempt to set a healthy boundary, they risk an immediate, devastating demotion to scapegoat status.
So you're saying their success isn't driven by passion. It's driven by a survival imperative?
Exactly. The hidden control structure here is brilliant in its cruelty. The parent doesn't need to yell at the adult golden child. The parent just has to withhold praise or express subtle disappointment, and the golden child's entire identity collapses.
And society actually praises this dysfunction.
That's the tragic part. Because their psychological damage is masked by a facade of high-functioning success, society validates them. This societal validation only reinforces the trauma.
Right, they look fine on paper.
They never receive help because they don't look like they're suffering. But internally, they are completely alienated from their own desires. They don't know what they actually like, who they actually want to love, or what they actually want to do with their lives.
Because every choice was about the parent.
Every single choice they ever made was calibrated to secure the parent's conditional approval.
That alienation is tragic. But when the scapegoat enters that same adult workplace or romantic relationship, the dynamic is equally fraught. Because their threshold for mistreatment is so abnormally high, they become the ultimate people pleasers.
They fawn.
Yes, they tolerate abusive bosses and toxic work environments because it feels normal. They rationalize horrific acts of psychological violence because, well, rage as a reaction to boundaries was just their baseline in childhood.
That normalization of abuse is a shared characteristic. But notice how the golden child handles the workplace. They don't just tolerate it. They engage in compulsive overfunctioning.
Their self-worth is welded to the achievement.
Exactly. They can't rest because resting feels like failing, and failing means loss of love. The fawn response, where a victim appeases an abuser to avoid conflict, isn't just about dodging a blow for the golden child.
What is it about for them?
For them, fawning is about proactively managing the entire environment to ensure they remain idealized. If a partner or a boss sees a flaw in them, the golden child experiences a total psychological rupture. They cannot tolerate not being perfect, which makes true, vulnerable intimacy absolutely impossible.
Wait, let me jump in there because the scapegoat also struggles immensely with intimacy, but the mechanism is different. They avoid intimacy because they equate vulnerability with an imminent attack.
Right.
If I show you my weakness, you'll use it.
If I show you my soft underbelly, you will stab it, because that's what my parent did. However, because the scapegoat has had to develop an incredible emotional resilience simply to survive the overt hostility, they often develop a profound capacity for empathy.
That's true. The clinical data shows that scapegoats who seek trauma-informed therapy can often process the trauma and build incredibly rich, authentic lives.
Assuming they find the right kind of therapy, of course.
Yes, usually modalities like EMDR or somatic experiencing, which actually focus on releasing the physical trauma trapped in the nervous system rather than just talking about it. They do the grueling work of reparenting themselves.
They face the pain head on.
They have the capacity to break the intergenerational cycle because they have felt the full, unvarnished pain of it.
That's a strong point about their resilience. But have you considered the treatment resistance inherent in the golden child's pathology?
It's notoriously difficult.
When a golden child finally hits a wall, and it usually takes a severe midlife crisis,
a major depressive episode, or the collapse of a marriage for them to even end up in therapy. The work is incredibly arduous.
They have to dismantle everything.
They have to dismantle an entire false self that has brought them societal rewards. Giving up the golden status feels like psychological death.
Because they're losing the only identity they've ever known.
Exactly. To heal, they have to face the devastating grief that they were never truly loved for who they were, only for what they provided. They have to grieve the parent they thought they had.
The cognitive dissonance must be staggering.
It is. The scapegoat goes into therapy knowing the parent is flawed. The golden child has to shatter their own idol, and that process can induce intense panic and destabilization.
I think we are mapping out the precise contours of how deeply pathological narcissism infects the family system. Let's zoom out a bit and look at the underlying psychological mechanism of why the narcissist creates this dichotomy in the first place.
The divide and conquer strategy.
Exactly. By artificially inflating the golden child and systematically devaluing the scapegoat, the parent deliberately pits the siblings against one another.
Yes, the pattern becomes much darker when you zoom out and look at the systemic intent. It is not accidental.
Not at all. The siblings are kept in a state of manufactured competition for the parent's scarce emotional resources. The scapegoat looks at the golden child with resentment, seeing the protection, the financial support, the praise they were violently denied.
And the golden child looks at the scapegoat with a mixture of pity, superiority, and sometimes genuine belief in the parent's narrative that the scapegoat is simply bad or crazy.
Right. And what this does is prevent the siblings from ever comparing notes. It prevents them from forming an alliance and recognizing the true source of the dysfunction, the parent.
It is the ultimate insurance policy for the narcissistic parent. If the children are busy fighting each other, they will never turn around and hold the parent accountable.
And this estrangement between siblings often lasts a lifetime.
It does. The narcissistic parent extracts their supply, their need for power, control, and centrality, by remaining the ultimate arbiter of worth in the family. It's a complete manipulation system designed to protect the parent's fragile ego at the absolute expense of the children's psychological development.
As we draw this investigation to a close, let me summarize my position based on everything we've uncovered.
Go ahead.
The neurobiological alterations, the realities of complex PTSD, and the lifelong battle against toxic shame validate the profound severity of the scapegoat's injury. They are forced to carry the unacknowledged psychological refuse of the entire family system. The overt hostility they endure requires them to exist in a chronic state of fight or flight, resulting in deep physiological trauma that fundamentally alters their ability to feel safe in the world. Their struggle is visceral, undeniable, and uniquely devastating.
And I will summarize my stance by reiterating that visibility does not equate to severity. The golden child's trauma is fundamentally harder to survive and untangle because it is rooted in the insidious erasure of their identity.
The invisible wound.
Yes, their lifelong enmeshment, the complete lack of reality testing, and the conditioning that love is merely a transaction for flawless performance leaves them hollowed out. Their damage is disguised as privilege, making them blind to their own abuse and terribly vulnerable to perpetuating the cycle of narcissism themselves. To lose your authentic self without ever realizing it was taken is a uniquely profound psychological injury.
I think where we absolutely converge today is on the underlying truth established by the clinical literature. Narcissistic relational trauma reorganizes a child's entire identity around survival, regardless of the specific role assigned.
Absolutely.
Whether a child is forced to survive by absorbing blows as the scapegoat or by completely erasing themselves to perform as the golden child, the developmental mandate is exactly the same. The child's needs are sacrificed to stabilize the parent's ego.
I agree completely. The ultimate tragedy is the system itself. It is a system that weaponizes a child's innate biological need for attachment and uses it as a mechanism for control.
The deliberate pitting of siblings against one another?
Yes. To protect a parent's fragile ego is a devastating legacy. It requires immense therapeutic work to untangle no matter which role you are assigned.
Untangling these roles, recognizing the invisible manipulation systems, and understanding the neurobiological impact is really just the beginning of exploring this material. There is so much more depth to uncover in the forensic analysis of family trauma.
Absolutely. The patterns are dark, but recognizing them, putting a name to the manipulation is the very first step toward dismantling them and finding resilience.
When we first started this analysis, we talked about overt versus covert damage. We've seen that in the architecture of a narcissistic family. Sometimes the violence is obvious, like shattering a window.
Right. But the most devastating destruction often happens when the foundation is quietly, systematically hollowed out from the inside, leaving a structure that looks perfect to the outside world, but is entirely unable to support the weight of a genuine human life. Which role suffers the greater tragedy? We leave the evidence for you to weigh. Thank you for joining us.